Well, hello, YBGs and the rest of the ECA crew. How is everyone today? This semi-sunny afternoon. My name is Caroline Bowen. I am the Director of Membership Engagement here at the ECA. And on behalf of the ECA, our Board of Directors and our YBG Education Committee, I would like to welcome you all, and I'm very pleased to have you here today. Our 6th annual YBG Ed Talks is happening. We skipped a couple years ago because we just thought we'd switch things up, and we almost caused a revolt. We had people emailing and asking, and how come you didn't do Ed Talks? So we are just thrilled to have it back and to make it happen again. My hope, of course, was that we would all be sitting together, as that's the way I've been starting every event this year. It didn't happen, so hopefully by the end of the summer we'll all be together. We do have golf though, so you know what, golf will be a together thing for sure over the summer. To kick things off, I'd first like to thank our title sponsor. Without title sponsors, without sponsors in itself, our events really couldn't happen. I would like to thank our title sponsor, Inline Group. Inline Group is not only a very good friend to the ECA, their president, Adam Temple, is also on our YBG Education Committee. So the support is incredible and we really appreciate it. I would like you now to all turn your attention to a video that we're going to play. And Adam just thought it'd be better to do a video and give sort of an all-encompassing view of what Inline is all about. So please turn your attention to your TV and I will stop for a bit.
As we've grown, we realized that offering multiple services under one roof is an advantage and a preference of our clients. Our services are so tied together that it became a natural evolution to evolve from construction surveying to materials testing to engineering to give us that one-stop shop appeal.
We provide a full range of material testing, which include concrete, soil, aggregates, and asphalt. With a fully certified CCIL laboratory in Edmonton and 4 CCIL mobile labs, we bring the services wherever our client needs.
Inline supports our projects and clients across multiple industries, from oil and gas to mining, municipal, transportation and land development, infrastructure, renewables to power generation.
We've had an amazing opportunity to work on some of the largest projects in Canada, most notably Fort Hills and LNGC. Working on projects of this magnitude has pushed our company to create and implement a number of policies and procedures that are generally only seen in larger companies.
The need to be competitive and agile is so essential in today's competitive world. That's what's got us into a lot of the projects we're on. But what's kept us on these projects is the ability to adapt to our client preferences, to be lean in our execution, and to drive safety and quality out of the way we execute our projects.
Wow, Inline has come a long way in the last few years. Incredible. Thank you very much. And again, Adam, without Inline and without your support, this event wouldn't have happened. So I really appreciate it. Next on our agenda is some lovely words representing our board. So Jennifer von Berent will bring greetings from the board. She is also, of course, a very good friend of the ECA. She is on our board of directors currently. She is a former alum of the YBG leadership team. So the succession plan that we had in place really succeeded when it came to Jen. So I'd like to welcome Jen and welcome a few words from you, please.
Thank you, Caroline. Hello, everybody. I wish I could see all of your faces right now, but I can sense that you're all there and we're really excited about this event today. So on behalf of the ECA Board of Directors, I want to thank you for being part of Ed Talks 2021. It's really hard to believe that we're going into our second year of pandemic life, which means that we aren't physically together. I think it's become abundantly clear to most of us that we are social creatures who need community. My fellow board directors and I, the YBG leadership team and the ECA staff, we're working really hard to ensure that this community continues to be supported and thrives until we can come together in person again, hence events like today. In 2017, the ECA board listed the YBG as one of our association's main strategic pillars to move the needle in elevating the construction industry. And 4 years later, thanks to hugely successful events like Ed Talks that seek to educate, enlighten, expand, and really bring us all together to create a common language, the YBG has far surpassed that strategic goal and far surpassed our expectations. And it's become one of the most potent groups in Canada that's bringing innovation and next level collaboration to the construction industry and really to all surrounding industry sectors that contribute to the built environment and to the communities that we all share. So thank you on behalf of the board of directors of the EC. Thank you so much to all who are here for being part of this community. And thank you to the YBG for continuing to lead and support in this community. Caroline, back to you.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, I love having you on our board. I also love having you as a wing woman and a conduit between the board and the YBG. And it's a pleasure having you here, of course. And you always bring such positive energy and such encouraging words. So I appreciate it. Okay, before we get started, one last thing, just some housekeeping. There is a lot of really great activity going on in the chat. So that is wonderful to see. Any questions, any comments, just keep that going. We will absolutely monitor it. I will try and get the questions answered. We'll get them over to Margot. We'll do our best to get any questions that you have answered. Obviously, we are going to do our best. If we cannot answer them all, have no fear. We'll ensure that they get to the right person afterwards. You can always email me after and say, hey, I had a question for this panelist. So I'm always around. You can absolutely reach out to me tomorrow or Monday or Tuesday, actually, on weekend, and just request any information. All the panelists are more than welcome to answer any of your questions. They're also very interested in hearing from you. So here we go. I would love, and I'm so excited to introduce our moderator and facilitator for the afternoon, Margot Ross Graham. Margot is the founder and owner of Sandbar Coaching and Consulting. She's a highly experienced business coach and strategic planner. She's demonstrated experience in leading change and process improvement initiatives. She's a certified executive coach and really an all-around incredible person. On a very interesting side note, you can catch Margot on every Tuesday morning as the workplace columnist on CBC, which is cool, our own little claim to fame, our own little celebrity. We are very, very lucky to have her as our moderator. It is always a pleasure to have a really great moderator who brings it all together, and I just can't wait to see what's in store. So please help me in welcoming Margot Ross Graham.
Thank you, Caroline. It is a real pleasure to be with you here today. I had the good fortune of being one of your speakers at one of your events in a number of years ago, so I recognize many of the names in the chat, and it's great to be here with you today. Today, I'm really excited to be a moderator, though, because we have a really great program for you today. You've seen our pictures numerous times, thanks to your social media campaign, so today you'll find out if we actually look like those pictures. Hopefully you'll won't be too surprised by us. But we are here to talk about some really important topics. We're going to tie them all together, but they are going to be different. And our goal is to leave you with some thoughts, some insights, some tools that you might take away and bring back to your workplace after this 2 hours together, and hopefully as quickly as tomorrow morning. And we're doing that with 3 fantastic speakers. The process that we're going to have today is I'm going to introduce each of our speakers at a high level, and then we're going to give each of them a chance to talk. So I'll introduce them a little bit more when it's their turn to talk. We're going to go through all 3 of them, and then we're going to ask you for your thoughts and questions and insights. So please, your chats are active. and keep them coming. We don't have a lot of time with each of our speakers, at about 10 minutes each. And the topics that they're going to share with us are topics that could last 10 days. So we know we're barely touching the surface. But the three individuals that you're going to hear from today, Stephanie Knaak. Stephanie is the founder and principal of Insight Research and Consulting. She's going to spend some time talking to us today about a topic that has become more and more prevalent in this work environment, particularly through this pandemic, and that's about mental health in the workplace, the stigmas associated with mental health in the workplace, and some things that we should be thinking about as it relates to that. And with a specific focus, of course, on the construction industry. We have John Trapp. John is the Vice President of Health, Safety, Environment, and Human Resources at Clark Builders. And John is going to talk about empathy and the impact of understanding empathy and sympathy in the workplace, and how Clark Builders is changing their culture by using these concepts of empathy and sympathy and leadership in their workplace. And our final panelist is Ian Chisholm. Ian also is an alumni of the speakers panel. I can't remember the exact year, but it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago that Ian was one of your speakers. He's the founder of the Roy Group. He is going to talk to us today about the power of mentorship and the power of a tribe of mentors and how that might make a difference for you in the workplace. So that's the group that we're going to spend our time with, and we look forward to sharing our ideas. So I think we're going to move into panel mode now. Here we are. Okay. Hi, team. So everybody, welcome to our team. We've got about, as I said, we've got about 10 minutes that each of the speakers are going to talk. We're going to start with Stephanie. So I'd like to give you a little bit more background about Stephanie. Stephanie Knaak holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Alberta. And she is, as I said, the principal and founder of Insight Research and Consulting. Dr. Nack holds an adjunct professorial appointment at the University of Manitoba's Faculty of Social Work and the University of Calgary's Cummings School of Medicine. And she works as a senior consultant to the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Her consulting and research specialties include workplace mental health, mental illness and substance use related stigma, program implementation and evaluation. She's widely published in the peer review literature and is considered an international expert in the field. In early 2020, she was one of only 2 Canadian experts invited to the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime in Vienna to consult on the development of international guidelines for the reduction of stigma in the context of substance use. Originally from Edmonton, Stephanie currently lives in Golden, BC. And Stephanie, in my work, I do a lot of work with organizations talking about mental health. And I have noticed that over time, we're getting more and more literature. But what a pleasure it is for us today to have a real life expert to be able to share your insights and for us to glean your ideas and hopefully take some of these great things back to the workplace. And now that we all have your contact information, you can expect more informed calls from many people, I hope. So Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you, Margot. Hello, everybody. It is a real pleasure to be here today and be a part of this panel and have a discussion about mental health, why it's important, and what it looks like in today's world. So I thought I would start on a little bit of a personal note, just to let you know that my interest and work in mental health research and consulting started in earnest about 10 years ago. And it started because I suffered a loss. One of my dearest and closest best friends in the whole world lost her life to a mental illness. She was only 38 years old. And so that's when I really decided to take up this work with some passion. Fast forward from there about 6 years. So 4 years ago now, my own 17-year-old daughter was diagnosed with depression and hospitalized because of the severity of her suicidal thoughts and urges. Thankfully, she's living very well in recovery today. But I share that story with you, that personal background and context, not because my story is unique, but precisely actually because it's not unique. That I know if I could see you all today, and if I was to take a survey of the virtual room and ask people if they had a story similar to mine, if they knew somebody in their personal life with a mental health or substance use problem, or if they themselves had personal experience with a mental illness or a substance use problem, I know that virtually every single person would raise their hand. That's just the reality of our modern world. We know that, from the numbers, in any given year, 1 in 5 Canadians will experience a mental health problem serious enough to warrant some kind of therapeutic intervention. And we know that that number has gotten higher in the last year since the pandemic, right? 40% of people in Canada are saying that their mental health has actually deteriorated since last March. And of course, we also know that substance use is on the rise, and substance use and mental health go hand in hand. In fact, a recent ISPA survey that just came out suggests that substance use is on the rise for both men and women, but for men, it's actually particularly stark. And right now, at this present moment, 28% of men who drink are actually experiencing problematic levels of alcohol use. And of course, because we know increasing substance use goes hand in hand with declining mental health, I think this paints a fairly telling picture of what this pandemic is doing to our mental health and what is still to come, right? Things that we need to think about and plan for as we move forward. And so when we think about people who work in the construction industry specifically, I don't have pandemic related stats, but we can assume that the same trends are likely occurring. But pre-pandemic Stats Canada tells us that 33% of workers in the construction industry are experiencing poor mental health. And this is pre-pandemic. Research also tells us that the risk of suicide for those working in the construction industry is actually 7 times higher than the national average, which is quite stark and concerning. And the other thing that I think we need to draw attention to is, in terms of kind of setting the stage, is our ongoing opioid crisis, because that's just as much about mental health as anything. And contrary to common stereotypes and what we often see in the news, this is a crisis that affects every part of society and all of us, right? Of all of the people we've lost over these last few years as a part of this crisis, well over half have been employed with lives, many like all of us. And of those, fully half of the lives lost have been from people who worked in the trades and construction industries. So again, I share my personal experience and my personal context, not because it's unique, but actually because it's not. And I think the first step to moving towards any kind of true commitment to workplace mental health and to really actually creating a positive and supportive workplace culture for mental health and wellness is to really acknowledge and recognize just how normal these kinds of struggles are in people's everyday lives. But it's also to recognize that we have a disconnect, right? I think many of us, we know intellectually, and we know through our personal experience that mental health and substance use problems are common. But yet we still like to keep a distance from them, right? We don't really want our coworkers to know. We for sure don't want our bosses to know. We often don't even want our close friends and family to know. And so we have this disconnect, and this is really, I think, a really core fundamental issue. And that's where the issue of stigma comes in, right? And in my mind, stigma is perhaps the biggest and most fundamental hurdle to seeking help for a mental health or substance use problem, to successful recovery from a mental health and substance use problem, and also to building truly supportive and mentally healthy workplace cultures, right? And all 3 of these things are so important for workplace mental health, right? Because if people don't feel comfortable reaching out and asking for help, then early intervention goes out the window, right? And if you don't have early intervention, up go your rates of turnover, your rates of absenteeism, your rates of presenteeism, and your disability claims. And the data supports this, right? We know that somewhere between 30 and 40% of all disability claims in Canada are for mental health reasons, but yet they account for about 70% of the cost. And in construction industry specifically, over the last 2 years pre-pandemic, from 2017 to 2019, those costs actually increased by 25%. So we know that the cost of doing nothing is actually becoming increasingly expensive. Number 2, if stigma interferes with recovery, which we know that it does, then, and if there is stigma within the workplace culture or embedded in some organizational policies or practices, then anybody who is struggling is going to have a tougher time in their recovery journey. Anybody who has been off work is going to have a tougher time coming back to work. And again, that's going to affect your productivity and your workplace culture and your bottom line. And number 3, if you don't have a workplace culture that's actually valuing and supporting and actively working to protect workplace mental health and psychological safety in the workplace, just like organizations commit to occupational or physical safety, then the workplace itself may be contributing to the rise of mental health and substance use problems in its workforce. So that's kind of the bad news, laying the ground with the bad news. And I for sure want to shift gears now to talk about some good news. The good news side of the equation. And I want to start with a statistic that I think is really, really important and really interesting. And it's a recent ISPA survey. It's pre-pandemic again from 2019. Sorry, and this survey found that 75% of workers would either be reluctant to or would not at all admit to a boss or coworker that they were suffering from a mental illness. That's still part of the bad news. But the good news is that at the same time, that same survey found that 76% said that they would be supportive and comfortable if a coworker disclosed to them that they had a mental illness, right? And so just for context, that level of comfort was only a little bit lower than what they said their reaction would be if a coworker or boss told them that they were suffering from a physical illness, right? That was about 83%. So what does that tell me? That tells me something really interesting about how stigma is operating in workplaces. And specifically, it tells me that stigma isn't so much a problem with individual people, but a problem more of the systems and cultures, right? And now changing systems and cultures, that's still a big hill to climb, of course. That organizational change and cultural change takes time, it takes commitment, takes investment, and it often takes some real bravery from leadership. But when I see a stat that says 76% of people would support their colleagues with mental health problems, but that same portion says they themselves wouldn't want to come forward out of fear of being judged, that tells me that we have a problem of good people working in outdated systems. And that actually gives me great hope and great optimism, because ultimately cultures and systems are maintained or changed by the very people working within them. So really, I see it as a sign that the readiness is there, that really all we need to do is for leaders to be willing to take that step and to make that commitment. And just to back up my assertion as well, another recent, again, pre-pandemic survey within the construction industry found that 64% of workers did wish that their employees did more to support workplace mental health initiatives. Okay, so then what do we need to do? And this is kind of where I'll finish off. And I think there's three main things, and these are kind of the big thrusts, if you will. I think one, it means committing to building more open and supportive workplace cultures around mental health and substance use. Ultimately, the ultimate goal would be to reach a place where psychological stress injuries and other kinds of mental health problems are really seen as no better or no worse than physical health injuries and other kinds of physical health problems that people might face. Number two, I think it means making sure that those employees who do happen to find themselves facing a mental health or substance use problem are getting the support that they need. So building that supportive infrastructure, through your policies and programs and training of leadership as well. And number three, I think it means fostering and cultivating and building capacity for positive mental health and psychological safety in the workplace. So what do those goals mean in practical terms? I think it means a lot of things, right? There's a lot of different things you can do and a lot of direction you can go, but I'll just kind of leave with three thoughts. And one is, first and foremost, you've got to focus on stigma reduction. And the key thing with stigma reduction is you do need to be using evidence-based approaches or programs, because if you're not really paying attention to the fundamentals of stigma and how you need to go after it, you could actually increase stigma inadvertently. And I'm happy to talk more about what that means in the larger discussion or the Q&A, but it also means that anti-stigma interventions in your efforts can't be one-off processes, right? It needs to be reinforced, it needs to be ongoing, and you need to have that strong leadership support behind it. And leadership really does have to be seen as leading the charge and carrying the torch on this, because it is ultimately culture change that you're going for. So sometimes the first step is actually just leadership training in and of itself, right? Getting leadership exposed to some education and training around mental health and around mental illness and stigma reduction. Number two, I think at some point it means paying attention to your organizational policies, your processes, and your practices, seeing where you're strong and also where some gaps may exist and make changes accordingly. And there are lots of tools and frameworks and resources out there to help organizations do that, including the Standard for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace. And number three, I think it means finding ways to promote positive mental health in your organization. And when we're talking about positive mental health, really, I just want to make the distinction that mental health and mental illness they're not opposites of the same thing. It's not, people aren't either mentally healthy or mentally ill, right? Even though we kind of think of things that way, it's actually both and, right? We can be very mentally healthy, even though we have an underlying mental health condition. And we can also have very poor mental health without actually having a diagnosable mental illness, right? So positive mental health can exist with or without an underlying mental health condition, the same way that positive physical health can exist with or without an underlying condition like asthma or what have you. And we can also have poor mental health with or without an underlying mental health condition. And I make that point just simply to kind of emphasize that we have to be thinking about both of those continua and how they intersect with each other. And so what I'm suggesting here is that basically we take that kind of more nuanced and holistic understanding of mental health and mental illness to heart, and we actually use that as a bit of a conceptual grounding to think about mental health in the workplace and to move forward. Because that way, we will be making sure that we're actually getting the whole picture and able to support employees across that full spectrum of wellness. So I'm going to leave it there. I think I've used up my time. I know John is going to go next, and I know he's going to talk about a specific mental health program that is really quite near and dear to my heart. And I think it'll provide some really nice breathe some practical life into some of these kind of broader concepts I've talked about. So thank you very much.
Stephanie, thank you so much. I have a list of questions here that I want to ask you, and I'm not even the one who's allowed to ask the questions. But what I would just some things that really jumped out at me is a lot about the language, and the words that we use could really make a difference in organizations and how we talk about things. So as you said, there's a distinction between mental health and mental illness, and it can be both and. They don't have to be one or the other. That in and of itself, and we even saw a comment right away that said, wow, like, understanding that definition makes a big difference. You also mentioned the importance of research, and you provided us some really good statistics, which I think will really help leaders in organization, because once you see it black and white, it's a whole lot easier to actually do something about it. And when you talked about 75% of people don't want to talk about what might be a problem for them, but 76% of people want to help. I think we're going to a nice crescendo here where we're not that far off. So the same people who don't want to talk are helpful, will happily help someone else. So if we can start a conversation, that is a big step. And that's really what I'm hearing. John is going to talk a little bit about some conversations. So thank you for that, Stephanie. And I'm going to turn it over to John Trapp. As I mentioned, John is the Vice President of People and Wellness, and he's responsible for health, safety and environment, human resources, and the Clark Builders University. John passionately advocates for using business as a force for good, with a focus on enhancing people's well-being in our industry, your industry, the construction industry. With a strong entrepreneurial background as the founder and president of a construction materials manufacturing company, John understands the critical importance of safety in the workplace and placing top value on the health and well-being of workforce. As a certified coach, John brings a skill set to help teams and individuals deepen their emotional intelligence and grow as leaders. John is the past president of the Entrepreneurs Organization in Edmonton, the former chair of the Integrative Health Institute Community Advisory Board at the University of Alberta, the former vice chair of the Alberta Metal Building Association, and co-founder of Lifestyle Meditation Incorporated. Something that I really found really helpful when I talked to John is his use of language and the words that he uses in workplace that in my experience with the construction industry are not words that are always used. He talked a lot about heart and the heart and the hands. And Stephanie, you talked about that. And it was really refreshing to hear that. And I'm looking forward, John, to hear your thoughts on Stephanie's lead in and what that means for Clark Builders. Welcome.
Thank you, Margot. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, everyone. I'm Stephanie. I'm still a little bit mesmerized here with the feelings that all the data that you shared invoked within me, and also your leadership with sharing from a vulnerable place of your relationship when it came to the impacts of mental health. And I would like to do the same and tell a really brief story about an entrepreneurial journey. Margot, you introduced some of my background before I ended up at Clark Builders and chose to be here for all the reasons that we're talking about today. I chose the construction industry because we are such a people industry, and it definitely is the environment that I find that we can make a really great cultural impact that really influence and positively impact a lot of lives. So, but my vulnerable story, and Margot, I'll also make sure I touch on empathy. I'm actually going to end with empathy, but I'm going to start with vulnerability. And I have a long lineage of mental health challenges in my family, and including myself. And I think it was probably, 10 to 13 years back, I had started a business. We had a supply business where we supplied insulation products to construction companies. And we were really successful. I from the outside, I had everything that you would anticipate would look like a healthy and happy life. Married, I had healthy kids, healthy spouse, succeeding business, and could barely get through the day on a daily basis with the challenges that I was facing in relationship to mental health. And that really sparked my journey. And just to explain what that was for me was really debilitating anxiety. I had always been a very social person and outgoing, and I couldn't quite understand what this brewing panic attacks were that were really happening every day that were debilitating to me. And it really sort of sparked my interest on introspectively what is going on with me. And if this is going on with me, it's probably going on with a lot of other people. And Stephanie, of course, you really shared broadly how much impact there is, across our world, really, with mental health challenges. So thank you for leading with your story. And I wanted to share a bit of mine. And I'll just, I'll really launch into what we've been doing at Clark Builders. And I'm also feeling, I'm feeling inspired that a lot of what Stephanie had shared, we've started in the right place, I guess you could say, but culture change takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy. So really, I'm going to segue between mental health and then emotional intelligence and EQ. So start with mental health since we're on that topic. And really it does, what we're finding is it takes an investment. It takes an investment by leadership. And Stephanie highlighted a program that she's very passionate about called The Working Mind. And so this is where Clark Builders has started in the last year, is really investing in all of our people leaders going through a 7-hour mental health managers training called the Working Mind program. And it's commissioned by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. And we invested in this from our foreman through to the president of our company. Anybody that was a people leader that had the opportunity to connect with people on a daily basis and really learn some of the foundational skills of what it takes to have a connecting conversation and really intentionally connect with the workforce in the way that is needed to really bridge that gap that we heard about between most of us, 70% that I'm hearing from the statistics, are very willing and wanting to help others if they are vulnerable enough to put their hand up and feel safe enough to be able to say, hey, I'm not myself today. And, but still 70% to Stephanie's data, not feeling comfortable or psychologically safe enough to say, hey, I'm not myself today. So we've invested in the foundation of this. And maybe I'll step back one more piece. In construction, this is a bit of a general, overreaching statement perhaps at times, but in construction, most of us succeed because we're very good at technical skills, and leadership positions are often achieved through, we're great at managing risk. We're great at, whether we're engineers or what our technical skills are, we can definitely climb, the I guess, corporate leadership levels with our technical skills. And I think there's just an assumption that our people skills are going to come along naturally with that. And that is definitely not always the case. And it hasn't necessarily been the case for me. So that's where we started, is let's not assume that because we're a leader, we have all this skill set in dealing with really sensitive issues around mental health and dealing with people's emotions. So we've started with that in our leadership development programs, making sure that we're developing competencies on the EQ side of things that match the responsibilities that we have with the teams that we lead. And then most specifically, working through this Working Mind program, and many of you that are on the call that have, a large field workforce or a small field workforce as we do, when we have hourly employees delivering value out on the job site with schedules and commitments that we have, that often is the priority. But as we also heard, if we're consistently doing that without the skills and the right environment for people to take time to really go invest in learning how they can actually connect with each other and help their coworkers in creating the right environment, we're moving too fast sometimes. So I'm really proud and happy that we laid the tools down, had our foreman go and invest in the training, and that's starting to lead to some really good conversation and in a foundation of what we started here at Clark. The next couple pieces that I would share that we're working on is through those programs is now we have a tool set. We have some new ways to engage in conversation, and really we're encouraging to use those tools, one of which, Margot, you sort of referenced, which is, language is huge. And my experience is, with psychological safety and what we're really focused on, maybe in the past, there was a stigma that you had to be a certain way at work, and then you're a certain way at home. And then when Ian puts his Oilers jersey on, he's a certain way when he's got his Oilers jersey on. But we really are who we are wherever we go. So allowing people to be their authentic selves and giving them a safe environment to show up authentically at work. And what we found is when you create space to just listen, and we've used the term heads, hand, and heart, and that's not an official Clark Builders term, but some of our leaders have, really just checking in. Most people show up every day with their hands ready to go. They're skilled at their labor, skilled at their craft. And we miss the head and the heart piece way too often, is what we're finding through the learning. The head piece, really, if we just think, where's our mind at today? Did something happen last night that is a pretty profound impact to that person's cognitive ability for the day? As we're hearing and we know, mental health was a crisis before we went into the pandemic, and now it's ever increasing with the strains that we've gone through in the last year. So really just checking in on how those people are doing, where their head's at for the day. And then when it comes to heart, those are the emotional pieces. Those are the qualities that sometimes are hidden. And so by just creating space, giving leaders the capacity to not have to problem solve the issues all the time, but just be able to listen. So there's a few things I'll share with what we've learned on how to appropriately listen when you do create that environment. And first, it's listening and then acknowledging what you hear. When you do create a safe space, just a quick skill in reflecting back what you've learned to really make sure you understand what the person is going through. And this, I think a lot of people avoid that step because they're worried that then they need to become the therapist or the expert. And of course, that is not the next step. but understanding what support and programs that you do have available within your company or within, all the great resources we have available through mental health support systems in our provinces and our regions and our cities, and being able to connect those people to those resources is really the next step. And getting them in touch and sharing from personal experience, perhaps what you've gone through and how you've used those resources, or anecdotally, you might know the way that that works and it can help connect them. And then following up, just a follow-up check-in is a part of the practicing and, showing the continuity of care that you have as a leader or a coworker to those individuals. So those are a few things we're applying. So really foundation, using my construction metaphors here, we got a tool set that we're learning through the training that we're taking, and we're practicing and we're leading by example. And I don't know how I'm doing for time, Margot, but I'll quickly speak to empathy, because this is another one of the takeaways that I hope all of us can leave here today with. And I know I joked with you earlier, Margot, that it was at risk of, getting the Brene Brown tag on this, but I would highly encourage anybody who wants to learn more about empathy to check out Brene Brown's work. She speaks to it very masterfully, but I will just quickly put it this way, as I think most of us, I know for myself, run to sympathy very quickly. And sympathy is when we hear of somebody going through something and we don't immediately feel that way right now. It's our natural tendency to say, to try them, pull them back up and say, at least this is going on, like sort of deflect it and say, oh, that sounds really bad, but, at least it's sunny out today, or at least we got a job to go to tomorrow. And the intention is positive, but it actually breeds disconnection when we do that. And so really learning empathy is feeling with, and the move with feeling with is, you may not be in that circumstance that that person is in right now, but you likely, through a little internal inventory, can find a time that you might have felt something similar to what they're sharing with you. And it's sort of likened to, they're down in a hole, they're feeling something. We climb down into the hole with them just to feel with them and acknowledge the emotion they're going through, not to solve it, not to deflect it. And that is actually what breeds connection. And as problem solvers, as we are in the construction industry, we're always looking to solve problems. I know that that's my strength and weakness. That actually, when we try to solve somebody else's problem, breeds disconnection. And it's a different way of being to show up and just empathize and feel with. The connection actually does the solving. It is part of the solution, not moving fast to, here's an idea for you. So I'll let that land, and hopefully, there'll be some more questions, Margot, as well, and happy to share more. And thanks for the opportunity to share what we've started at Clark to impact the culture and hopefully help us all through into the future.
Great. Thank you, John. Thanks so much for sharing and for building off of Stephanie's content. And, it's really interesting. Again, you talked about language, and if you were going to have to be put in a crowd of people, there's no better crowd than Brene Brown. So own it if you can. And all of us should own it, because this concept of empathy and sympathy is really a difficult concept to understand. And leaders in organizations, of which all of you are, having to, your job is to solve problems. Your job is to take care. That's what you're good at. That's how you got there. And so I really encourage you to learn a little bit more about that. And then the other comment I would just add, and I think this will lead nicely for Ian, is that some of the research that I do with leadership and talent development is that listening, which is such what we would call a basic skill, is one of the hardest skills to learn to do well, as you've just alluded to, John. And a little tip for our colleagues out in the space here, there is a lot of research that shows there's an inverse relationship to the height you flow into an organization and your ability to listen. And it isn't going up, it's actually going down. So I'd encourage you to think about how your own listening is. We will touch on the Working Minds program just slightly. I just have a quick question for either you or Stephanie. Where could these folks access the Working Minds program? Is it a program they can sign up for, they can take? Is it online? Just a high level thought.
I'll just mention how we got started with it, Margot. So yeah, I would just encourage, and Stephanie I know is intimate with the program, so she might be able to tell a little bit more. But yeah, we we did our research and wanted to find out, the best programming available, and really trusted what came out of the Mental Health Commission of Canada. So it was just under the working mind, and we figured out how to do it in a virtual environment as well. So they do have that available now. And I don't know, Stephanie, if you want to add to that.
No, I think you covered it, John. That's great. I would suggest, the first step is just to look at the Mental Health Commission of Canada website and find the Working Mind program there. But I'm also happy to provide any additional information or, put you in contact with certain people too, if you want to learn more, or additional, the papers and things that kind of are behind it, right? That research base behind it, as you mentioned, John.
Great, thank you. All right, and then I'd like to share a little bit about our next panelist, Ian Chisholm. As I mentioned, Ian is the co-founder of the Roy Group, which he co-founded in 2014. His greatest fulfillment comes from seeing the multiplier effect that is achieved with honorable people from all walks of life invite each other into leadership. With a deep commitment to helping individuals realize that their most important piece of work they will ever undertake, Ian has become a personal resource to clients, where his ability to connect with people and relate ideas through story engenders deep personal and cultural change. He's a fierce believer in people's abilities to shape their path and influence the path of others through consistently bringing their finest conduct to every interaction. Originally hailing from Saskatchewan, currently residing in Sydney on the island, Ian is a well-known coach, practitioner, social entrepreneur, and pioneer of executive education. He's a budding author and an avid overland land adventurer. He's a not unfamiliar face to many organizations on this call. And Ian, it's great to have you here with us today. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Margot, and thanks, Stephanie, and thanks, John, and thanks to the ECA for having me join you today. I think that we get asked to be on panels like this because we have some ridiculously strong opinions about something. And I have ridiculously strong opinions about all kinds of things, but most certainly the largest collection of those convictions are about this dynamic that Margot mentioned around mentorship. It was interesting about 15 minutes ago when after Stephanie had been, talking about her personal connection to her convictions in the work that she does, and John talked about why he is personally connected to the convictions. I had a little panic just to be like, well, Chiz, you better let people know what your personal connection is to this field of mentorship. And it didn't take a lot of digging to realize that it too came from a place of vulnerability, which I just think is an interesting byproduct of today, that often the bodies of work that we're most connected to happen for some reason. 21 years ago, I took on a job that put me in way over my head. And if it had not been for the presence of some very special people that I would call mentors, I don't think the story would have gone well, personally or professionally. And maybe that is the connection that I have. I wanted to share 3 of the strong convictions that we have about mentorship that I think are relevant to what we're talking about today. And the first is that at Roy Group, we really believe that the word mentor is a gift word. And what I mean by that is that it's an artificial set of rules around a gift word, but you can't call yourself a mentor. You have to earn it. You have to be given that word by somebody who you have played that role in the story of their life. And I get pretty excited about finding out from people what they did to earn that word. A lot of our research at Roy Group over the past 10 years has been around asking people to think about the people that have earned the word mentor in their life, and then to just reverse construct it and tell us a story about what did they do that earned that word. And there's some interesting clusters of stories. One cluster of stories is about being an example. Being an example that people can just watch and experience And I think as emerging and existing leaders as part of this group, a really important reminder linked very much to what Stephanie said, that people are noticing what we do. They're noticing how we respond to some of these areas that might have a stigma, and they're going to emulate that. That's one of the oldest ways that human beings learn, is to watch somebody and then to just copy that the next time that they are in a situation. Relating to John's comment that this is cultural, this is about changing the culture of the organization, the way that people are examples of different things. There's another cluster of stories about really great instruction, that there's something about the way that when a mentor teaches you how to do something, maybe it's an approach or a model or a concept or an idea, but there's something about the way that they share that with you, that it sticks with you the rest of your life. So we know that mentors earn this word by taking the time and creating the space to be really great instructors. There's another little cluster around advice, not compulsive advice. I liked what John said about how sometimes trying to solve things for people actually deteriorates the amount of trust or the amount of safety that that person can have with us. So what mentors don't do is hit us with the 10 pieces of advice that immediately come to their mind when they've listened to us for 20 seconds. What we know in these stories is that they're very discerning and they listen very carefully, and that those 10 pieces of advice that they initially had, they just hang on to that advice. It's not going to be past its due date if you just hang on to it. Oftentimes with good listening, it distills down to maybe that one piece of advice that the person can really use and use to get some traction with. There's a remarkable cluster of stories about coaching, which is the other kind of tie that binds Stephanie and John and I and Margot on this call, that mentors really understand coaching. They know what it is. They know how to do it properly. They have some method when they do it. It's something that they practice, and they use that ability to position people for higher levels of performance and learning and engagement. A conversation with them has a very clear focus, and they're able to use that to position people to go forward more clearly. There's one last cluster that has to do with failure, in that many people, when they tell stories about their mentors, will talk about the mentor's reaction to failure. That when I wiped out, this person didn't bring a lot of judgment or scolding or correction or tried to fix it. They let me go through it. They turned it into a learning experience, and they actually kind of made us not proud of failing, but it's almost like at the ski hill when you have a really good wipeout. It's definitely something to talk about that night when you can explain to people the massive wipeout that you had. I thought that was interesting, that mentors really have this constructive relationship with failure. They don't try to fail. They don't promote failure. But when it happens, they have a great way of helping people be compassionate. So those are some of the things that we know about what earns leaders the word mentor. And I guess what I would say is, in this world, I would go and earn it. Go and learn how to do those things well, and make yourself that person in the equation. What we've known for thousands of years is that mentorship is a very smart strategy for developing humans. What we're finding out in the last 15 months is that mentorship is also an incredible strategy for resilience and connection, which brings me to my second conviction, which is that the idea of mentorship just got very, very relevant because it is such a special connection. I think of it a little bit like a GPS in your phone. And if I don't know where I am, which is a pretty good way of describing where most people are this year, whether that's professional or personal, whether people feel functional or that functionality starts to feel questionable, people just really are having a hard time knowing where they are. So if I don't know where I am, I can use my GPS. As soon as my phone connects to one satellite, that's the start of the process, but it's not enough. And for me, I think about the importance of our connection with our partners or our close friends. That probably gives us a primary connection. But then it's really important that for my GPS to work, I need a second connection. So having a few key connections to colleagues become critically important. Now I can really know where I am. And if we add a third and a fourth satellite to the equation, now my GPS can tell me exactly where I am. And from there, I can kind of move forward. One of the most interesting things is that we're finding in this research is that it's actually teams of mentors that create the biggest effect. When I don't just have one mentor, but when I've put the work in to create the relationships with a collection of people who have earned that word in my life, and I can connect with them individually and together to have those conversations that really help me figure out where I am professionally and personally and in life. The third conviction that I wanted to talk about is really about change. And one of the things that a lot of our work is focused on is that something very special happens in a culture where the leaders in the organization want to earn this word together. And it creates like this incredible thing that's a bit like a unicorn, but I think I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to develop this in workplace. I mentioned it, it's this idea of a team of mentors. The word team is a gift word also. We might be a group of people that do things together, but to actually be a team is quite a special thing. Combining those two things to be a team of mentors, now we're talking about two gift words. There's a lot of earning to do in this equation, but when leaders do earn this word together, something very special happens to the culture. All of the things that leaders have to pay attention to, like performance and learning and engagement and succession, and all of these things that we have to kind of pay attention to and drive forward, those things start to automatically take off when leaders, like everybody on this call, puts the work in to earn that word mentor. I liked how Stephanie kind of gave 3 practical takeaways, so I'm going to try to do the same. The first is around that idea of gift word. I would invite each of you to consider putting whatever effort is required into earning that word. That threshold from leader to mentor is a really special one. And there's very few people that I know that once they've made that transition are prepared to come back across the line. It's fulfilling. It brings significance to your life. And I think it will amplify the power of your ability to lead. Secondly, is to go and curate that collection of mentors for yourself and put the time in. Mentorship is not efficient. It works precisely because it's not efficient. It happens when we pour time at it. We take an hour where no work is going to get done to connect with somebody and have that connection and to see where the conversation goes. So don't get hung up with efficiency. Pay more attention to what works and what's effective. Lastly, in your efforts to change the culture of your organization, I would put the flag on the hill to think about this idea, not just the senior team, but leaders at all levels, crew leaders, superintendents, supervisors. Get a group of people who are asked to demonstrate leadership at the same level as you and start this process of becoming a team of mentors for the people that look to you for leadership. With that, I'll turn things back to Margot and thank Stephanie and John again. This was a fun, I'm really happy I got to go last because there might even be some of these convictions that got a little stronger over the course of the last 12 minutes.
Ian, thank you so much. And your convictions tied a lot of the last few minutes together, absolutely. And something that strikes me in your conversation around looking for mentors and building a team of mentors is it does take a skill that we've talked about in the other two, and that's around vulnerability and asking for help. And I'm making up a statistic. So I'm going to tell everybody right now, I'm making up a statistic, but I'm building off of what you told us, Stephanie, which was 75% of people don't want to tell about their own mental health problems that they have, but 76 want to help. And I'm going to guess from my experience, maybe the number is higher, but there's probably 75% of people in this room alone who don't really want to ask for help or show the vulnerability of needing help. But there's another 76% of us who are desperate to help you. And so it feels like there's probably the same thing, this sense of vulnerability. So John, Ian, thank you for bringing that to us and reminding us of the importance of we have to go out and ask, and then you start to earn these things and be better at these things. So we're going to move into the Q&A. I want to say thank you to all of our three speakers, and I'm going to encourage you to put your questions in the chat box, I guess you have to put it in, you can't yell out to us. So put it in the chat box. I'm going to kick off with one question that I have. I'd be interested in each of our speakers' thoughts on this, and then I look forward to hearing what the room has to say. And this is building on that concept of vulnerability that fell through all of your talks and the need to look for help, to ask for help. And I'm just curious, in this, in the pandemic world that we're living in right now, and the massively changing workplaces and the work that's put on the roles of the leaders in this room to try to support their organizations through it, do you have any tips or things that you have seen that might help them notice when people are in need of help, and then how to offer that help in a safe, caring, kind way without pre-assuming what the help they need is? So just curious about tools or things that you might offer the group based on your background and experience, the programs you're running. I'll start with Stephanie if you have an answer for me.
Sure, great question, and such an important question. I think all of this talk about leading from a place of vulnerability is so valuable and so important. And I think that as leaders, being open with some of your own stuff, I think is really an important first step that can open up those conversations with teammates and with people that you're managing. So just starting from that place of having a little bit of openness yourself about what you might be going through. In terms of noticing other things, there are some common tells, I suppose, coming to work later, just noticing productivity goes down. Maybe somebody who's normally really outgoing is becoming more quiet and withdrawn. So there might be just some subtle behavioral things that you might notice. And I think it's very much what John talked about, and Ian as well, and that the start is really just having that conversation, saying, hey, how are you doing? How are you doing today? I know this stuff is tough, what you can provide a little bit of context, but then it's really just about listening. It's really just about listening and hearing what they have to say. And as John really emphasized, you don't need to solve their problem for them, but really it's just allowing them to have space to kind of open up and have a little bit of a conversation is sometimes all that's needed to in that moment.
Hey, thank you, Stephanie. John, do you have anything to add?
I just at risk of sort of repeating a little bit, but I did want to reemphasize what Stephanie had shared. So I'll speak from how I approach it. Looking inward first, working with ourselves, and we're our best test subject, if you will, and really acknowledging what we might be going through and understanding day to day the different impacts of the stressors that have happened to yourself over the last year. I think in organizations, I think our leaders, and in construction, a lot of us are leaders all the way through the organization. Leaders have been handed a massive load and are bearing that load on their shoulders and maybe not acknowledging the impact of that to themselves. So I would just sort of reiterate to start with yourself, it's really hard to support others when you're underwater yourself. And there's a tendency to want to do that. And I just know for myself, piggybacking on Stephanie's comment, if you're not feeling stable enough to ask that question to somebody else, how are you doing? Because you intuitively probably know, if you're present and you can listen, that they will hopefully answer authentically if you hold that space for them. Hard for you to empathize and carry a load with them if you yourself are feeling just on the edge. So, and then lastly, from a vulnerability standpoint, I think it feels vulnerable to authentically ask somebody how they're doing. So practice that. Practice where it's safe first, even practice at home with people that you trust and that and that you can actually ask that question to. And then you'll get more confidence and courage in asking, somebody else that you can tell needs to be asked that question. And then it gets easier from there.
Great. Thank you, John. Ian, any thoughts to add?
Yeah. Again, it banks off of what Stephanie said. She said something about, trust what you're noticing. And it brought up a little example, a story that I'm not really proud of. When I did notice something and I didn't act on it. And I'll tell you the story. It involves people on another continent, so I'm pretty sure it's okay to share this. But we had a great chef at the leadership center that I was in charge of in Scotland, and he was a vet. He had served in Northern Ireland, and he had also served in Iraq the first time around. He was a big, kind of threatening guy, but a friendly giant, and he loved, working with the staff, and he really loved his job. His girlfriend worked at the center as well. There was one night when a group of local school kids came across the road to sing in front of a group, and there was a little bit of alcohol involved, nothing serious, but they were singing in Gaelic, which has a lot of the same words as Irish Gaelic. And so Richard had this bit of an incident where all of a sudden he was kind of acting out and kind of heckling these little school kids from the back of the room. It was a very odd thing. In my guts, I knew there's something not cool about this, that this big, strong guy who's normally, gentle as a lamb is heckling these, 8-year-old kids who are singing their hearts out. And was it because he's a big, tough guy? Was it because he's another man? Is it because it was easier for me just to let it pass? That's what I did. And 3 weeks later, there was a huge incident that started with a scuffle in a bar, transferred to a bit of a fight in a house party, and ended with a serious assault. And Richard was being hauled off by the police. There's two things that I would say make up my regret about my role as a leader in that story. One is I didn't trust my gut. And secondly, that I didn't have the social courage to go and be transparent the next day, to sit down with Richard to say, something happened last night that I noticed. It was out of character. Normally you're gentle and accessible and a very kind person, but there was a little bit of heat in the way that you kind of heckled those kids. And I'm here to ask you what's going on. That combination of being honest about what I've noticed, but not judging, but having the courage to go and actually trust my gut. Trusting your gut is just the start of it. You've actually then got to have a way of putting that on the table in a very transparent way that the person doesn't feel judged. I'm wishing that's what I would have done.
Okay, thank you. And what I'm also hearing from that story and the other two is that you can ask the question. That doesn't mean you have to solve the problem. The demonstration of you are aware that something's going on. So if there's a lesson to be learned in there, from what I heard, was demonstrating your caring by asking. That might be the only step you have to take, but besides listening, and then maybe directing them somewhere else. And there are resources available for people. So from a leadership lesson for this group, you don't have to have all the answers. That's probably the number one lesson. You don't have to, but you do have to notice. And I think workplaces are changing when people are noticing. We have just a couple minutes. I'm just curious. I'll ask another question, and it's a broader question. And it's, we are in such a crazy world, and your businesses have changed. We've talked a little bit about dealing with our own issues. I would just be interested in your perspectives from the work that you do in organizations, maybe a little bit of advice for the group, which is, what do you see as some, maybe one, I'm sure you've seen a lot, but maybe give us your one big impact that you think this pandemic has had on workplaces and the leaders in those places, and maybe a tip for them, more beyond what we've talked about today, but maybe a tip on something that they might apply, they might do, they might take away from their workplace to help the place be a better place. I'm just curious on what you're seeing is happening in your industries and how you might offer some support. And I'll let anybody jump in, and then we'll just give everyone a chance.
I'm going to jump in because I always follow Stephanie, and she's got such wisdom. So I'm going to be very present for your wisdom post my comments, Stephanie and Ian. I would think for us, it's connection. As humans, we're hardwired to connect. And that actually is physical as well. That's physiological. And a lot of that appropriately so has needed to be changed. And so I would just encourage, we are encouraging time for just social connection, Zoom to Zoom. I'm on 8 to 12 Zoom meetings a day some days, and you just kind of shrug it off and say, oh, I was with people, but looking for ways to really connect. Those of us that are in the office most of the time, getting creative that way and socially connecting when we can't physically connect. And then on the job site, we have our frontline workers that are out there, doing what they do every day and used to really leaning each other as teams and being physically connected, doing this physical work together. So I just think the same advice there, which is, even though they're 6 feet apart and there's PPE on and all those things that are required, but looking for a way to reinstitute some of the connection that used to happen in the lunchroom or used to happen while you're working side by side on something. I can't overstate that enough, I think, of being creative. And there are things that we can do that'll work for your organization, and people will be safe. And just acknowledging that would be a good start.
Stephanie's the finale. I'm not going to go after Stephanie either.
Okay, Stephanie, you get the cleanup crew here.
I think, the piece of advice that I'm giving a lot of our clients in Alberta specifically is to kind of go beyond perseverance. I think perseverance is a default setting that a lot of us from the prairies have, and people that move to the prairies quickly acquire. I think it might have something to do with the weather. I'm not sure, but I think that's one way of getting through this. And I think it's incomplete. And I think that requires what John just said about connecting with people in a way that's really curious about what has shifted around for people. The pandemic was meteoric, not just because it came out of nowhere, but because of the impact it had on people. And what I've found is that impact is so unique to each person, to each family, to each team. And so leaders have to create some space to talk about that, because that meteoric impact really ruptured the bedrock of how we understand ourselves. And people, like I said earlier, don't know exactly where they are. And that is why we need connection, is to kind of know in this moment, this week, this month, this year, where I am and how do I kind of move forward from that. So I would say the advice is to create some space for letting people tell some stories about what they've noticed about themselves and how things are different, and maybe even some patterns coming out of this pandemic that they would actually like to keep, rather than it being something that we just persevere through.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, you don't have to throw everything away. Stephanie,
Thank you. Yeah, so now I'm at the end with nothing original left to say, unfortunately. Yeah, and so I will echo both John and Ian's great advice and thoughts. I think one of the things that has really been brought into relief for me over this last year, again, being a person who is now sitting on Zoom calls all day long, is just seeing the extent to which the personal and the professional now are intermixed, right? And it's always been the case, right? We always bring our full selves to work, no matter, who we are and where we're at. But now that is being exposed so much more, right? When you're sitting on video calls and cats and dogs are coming into the picture and kids are crying in the background and and there's noise and there's, and there's repair people in your home and, all of this stuff is happening. And so it's becoming so much more noticeable and also, and the blurring of the boundaries, right? Where now there's more emails that come through on the weekends and late at night. And you can tell that people are, at least in my field, are not kind of having those boundaries anymore. It's all kind of bleeding into everything. So again, I think it is more just that real recognition that we all have a lot going on, right? And that is going to be different for everybody. And as Ian said, this pandemic is affecting all of us, but it's different, right, in terms of how it's specifically impacting each family or each one of us. So I think I absolutely just echo John and Ian by saying, just by giving people a little bit of space, a little bit of benefit of the doubt, and trying to foster that ongoing connection wherever possible. Because I think that's been one of the hugest pieces, is that loss of personal connection and ability to really be together, right? And in community in different ways. So getting creative with that.
Okay, thank you. So being creative, personal connection, there's blurring of the boundaries, and we think we see so much of people's lives, we think we know more than we do. So be careful about that. But find these creative ways to connect, to listen, to demonstrate some heart, to reach out to people you could help, to reach out to people who need help. Build your tribe, build your team. And these are a few of the gems that I pulled out from the three of you today. And so I just like to say thank you to all of you. I know that 10-minute talk over a 2-hour session is a lot of work and a lot of effort. And I want to say thank you very much to all three of you. I hope to the community that we've talked so much about today, we're building community here. I hope to this community that you have been able to take something away from these intelligent minds. And you don't often get to hear from these folks in an environment like this, sometimes in no environment. So I'm really happy that you're able to join us today. Thank you to all of you. It was my pleasure to get to work with you and to meet some of you for the first time, others to reconnect. And I wish the group a great day and a great week. And I'm going to hand it back to Caroline to wrap it up. But thank you all for coming with us today.
Wow. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to tell you my 3 favorite things. So I have my 3 favorite things that everyone had an incredible words to say, but I would say, Stephanie, you kicked us off with vulnerability. So by you kicking us off with that story, it's amazing. It sort of set a tone for the next 90 minutes. And it's funny, you never know where this is going to go, right? So you don't know if it's fun for me too, because I'm a participant like everybody else. So I just want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you for sort of setting the tone and really just showing your true self. I think it can be very scary to be vulnerable. John, I would say connecting the head and the heart is what I took away. I think we forget that they're 2 different things because we're all connected. We think we're all connected, but we're actually, your head and your heart are 2 very separate things. So for me, it's something that I'm going to think about way more than I ever did. And just, I'm very much a fixer as well. I'm like, well, what the heck? Like, just do it, or just shake it off, or just move on. And so it's just really good to be conscious of the head and the heart and being 2 very separate organs in your body. And Ian, I really love your theory on earning the title mentorship. I think there are a lot of people that I've run across in my life that think they're mentors. Just ask them. And I think if we could all just spend our lives earning that right, and nobody calls themselves a mentor, just earning that right and spending your life walking around just wanting to be a mentor and earning it, I really think that we would just be in a better place. It'd be really neat. So those were my 3 takeaways. I hope everybody else had some good takeaways as well. Really, to wrap it up very quickly, I would like just Daniel McAllister to come on. He's our head of our Ed committee. He is our chair of the Ed committee this year. He's going to say a little quick goodbye and a thank you. I love you all. You are very, very appreciated by me, and I just love that you shared your wisdom. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Caroline. And I'd just like to start by thanking John, Ian, and Stephanie for their fantastic, and Margot for their fantastic insight. I know everyone in the audience probably enjoyed that as much as I did. I just wanted to say thanks to everyone. This concludes our 6th annual Ed Talks. It's crazy to say that we've done 6 of these already, but yeah, we really like to say thanks to everyone for joining. And I'd also like to thank our title sponsor today, Inline Group. And then also a big thank you to the YBG leadership team, ECA members of the board, and the ECA team behind the scenes, including Caroline, who helped put this event together. We couldn't do this without all of you. So we hope to see your smiling faces again soon. But thanks to everyone for joining and for a fantastic event. And I'd just like to say, have a great day and have a great week. Thanks so much.